My fiancé said I was temporary. At the altar, I suddenly turned his perfect wedding into the trap that left his empire crumbling. Harrison Montgomery and I had been together for 3 years. He was everything I thought I wanted: successful, charming, and from a well-respected family. His mother, Diana, had become like my own, filling the void left by my parents' passing. His sister, Claire, was the best friend I never had. Everything was perfect, or so I believed. The bachelor party was at the Grand Hotel just down the street from our penthouse. I hadn't planned to go there that night, but I'd forgotten to give Harrison his grandfather's cufflinks, a special request from Diana for the ceremony. The hotel staff knew me well. Harrison and I had hosted numerous charity events there. They directed me to the private lounge without question. That's when I heard it, Harrison's distinctive laugh, followed by words that would shatter my world. "Come on, man, you can't be serious about settling down with Sophia." His best friend Blake's voice carried through the partially open door. "Why not?" "She's perfect on paper," Harrison replied, his words slightly slurred. "Her trust fund will help expand Montgomery Enterprises, and her connections are invaluable. Besides, she's completely devoted to me." Laughter erupted, but it was his next words that turned my blood to ice. "She's just temporary anyway, until someone better comes along. Someone more suitable for the long term." I stood there, clutching the velvet box containing the cufflinks, as my entire world crumbled. 3 years of memories flashed before my eyes, but now they were tainted with a new perspective. The late-night business calls, the unexpected cancellations, the subtle ways he'd manipulate my decisions. It all made sense. But I didn't cry. Instead, a strange calm settled over me. I returned home and opened my laptop. As Harrison's business partner, I had access to everything: emails, financial records, client information. Hours later, I had enough evidence to destroy not just his heart, but his entire, carefully constructed world. The morning of the wedding arrived with an unsettling serenity. My hands didn't shake as I applied my makeup, a stark contrast to the trembling excitement I'd imagined feeling on this day. The evidence I gathered lay hidden in a cream-colored envelope, tucked safely in my wedding suite. Diana burst into the room, her eyes glistening with motherly pride. "Sophia, darling, the flowers just arrived and they're absolutely perfect," she said, holding up my bouquet of white peonies and blush roses, unaware that it would soon become a weapon rather than a symbol of love. As my bridesmaids fluttered around me like elegant butterflies in their champagne-colored dresses, I caught Claire's reflection in the mirror. Harrison's sister stood behind me, adjusting my veil with such tenderness that my resolve almost wavered. "Almost. I can't believe my brother got so lucky," Claire whispered, squeezing my shoulders. "You're going to take his breath away." "If only you knew how right you are," I thought, maintaining my practiced smile. The next hour passed in a blur of hairspray, lipstick touches, and champagne toasts. I couldn't bring myself to drink. Every ping from my phone made my heart race, not from pre-wedding nerves but from anticipation of what was to come. My private investigator had promised final confirmations by noon. At 11:43 a.m., the text arrived, additional evidence secured. "The reporter is in position." I excused myself to the bathroom, phone clutched in my trembling hands. The screenshots confirmed everything: Harrison's offshore accounts, the diverted company funds, and, most damningly, emails to his mistress, discussing their post-honeymoon plans. The same mistress who, ironically, sat on his company's board of directors. A knock at the door startled me. "Sophia, the coordinator says we have 30 minutes, Claire called out. "Just finishing up," I responded, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. I took one last look at myself in the bathroom mirror. The woman staring back wasn't the same person who'd spent yesterday morning writing her vows with tears of joy. This woman wore her wedding dress like armor, her red lipstick like war paint. When I emerged, Diana pulled me aside. "I want you to have this," she said, fastening a delicate pearl necklace around my neck. "It's been in the Montgomery family for generations." Harrison's grandmother wore it on her wedding day. The pearls felt like ice against my skin, another family heirloom that would become part of this day's collateral damage. "Thank you, Diana," I whispered, hugging her tightly. "I want you to remember that no matter what happens today, you've been more of a mother to me than I could ever have hoped for." She looked at me quizzically, but before she could respond, the wedding planner appeared, headset in place, clipboard at the ready. "Places, everyone. The guests are seated, and the groom is at the altar." My bridesmaids lined up, their excitement palpable. Claire kissed my cheek before taking her place at the front of the line. I waited until they'd all left before retrieving the envelope from its hiding place and sliding it into a discreet pocket sewn into my dress. The church doors closed behind them, leaving me alone in the vestibule. Through the heavy wood, I could hear the string quartet playing Pachelbel's Canon, the same song Harrison and I had chosen together on a rainy Sunday months ago. My phone buzzed one final time, reporter and photographer in place. Business partners all present, police contact on standby. I deleted the message and tucked the phone away. The wedding coordinator appeared beside me, radiant with professional cheerfulness. "Ready, Miss Grant?" I thought of the moment I'd first met Harrison at that charity gala, how his smile had lit up the room. I thought of our first kiss in the rain, the way he'd proposed under the stars in Tuscany, all the dreams we'd shared. Then I thought of his cruel laughter last night. The years of lies, the carefully orchestrated deception. The church doors swung open. The wedding march began to play, and 200 guests rose to their feet. At the end of the aisle, Harrison stood, tall and handsome in his tuxedo, beaming with proud, practiced charm. He had no idea that in less than 5 minutes, that smile would shatter, along with his reputation, his business, and his carefully constructed world. I took my first step forward, clutching my bouquet. The weight of the envelope against my thigh reminded me of my purpose. This wasn't a wedding march, it was a countdown to destruction. Yes, I told the coordinator, my voice still wrapped in silk. I'm ready. Each step down the aisle brought flickers of memories, moments I'd once treasured but now recognized as carefully crafted deceptions. The soft whispers of beautiful bride from the guests felt like bitter ironies against my skin. Harrison's smile grew wider as I approached, his confidence unwavering, the perfect mask of a man who thought he had everyone fooled. 3 steps from the altar, I caught Blake's eye in the front row. His smirk faltered slightly when I held his gaze, perhaps sensing something amiss in my expression. Next to him sat Rebecca Matthews, Harrison's business associate, wearing a tasteful navy dress that I knew cost more than most people's monthly salary, a dress likely purchased with diverted company funds. 2 steps away, and I could see Diana dabbing her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. Claire stood among my bridesmaids, practically bouncing with excitement. The sight of them made my heart clench, knowing they were about to become collateral damage in Harrison's downfall. One final step. You look stunning, Harrison whispered, reaching for my hand. I stepped back, just slightly, just enough. The priest opened his mouth to begin, but I turned to face our audience instead. The envelope felt heavy against my thigh as I reached for it, the sound of the seal breaking echoing in the sudden silence. Before we begin, my voice carried clearly through the church. I'd like to share some readings, not from the Bible but from Harrison's private emails to Rebecca Matthews, dated throughout our engagement. The color drained from Harrison's face as I pulled out the first document. Rebecca shifted uncomfortably in her seat while confused murmurs rippled through the congregation. My dearest Rebecca, I read, my voice steady. Once the wedding secures the merger and Sophia's trust fund is accessible, we can proceed with our original plan. She suspects nothing. The murmurs grew louder. Harrison stepped toward me, but I moved away, pulling out more papers. But wait, there's more, I continued, my smile sharpened glass. Would anyone like to hear about the offshore accounts? Or perhaps the creative accounting at Montgomery Enterprises? I have copies for everyone, including the SEC representatives, who should be arriving right about. The church doors opened with perfect timing, revealing 2 suited agents. No! Harrison lunged for the papers, but I'd anticipated this. I let the documents scatter, watching as they floated down like toxic snowflakes, each one revealing another layer of his corruption. The photographer I'd planted among the guests captured every moment, their cameras clicking rapidly. Sophia, please, Harrison hissed, grabbing my arm. We can talk about this. I twisted free, facing him with all the cold fury I'd accumulated. Talk? Like how you talked about me at your bachelor party? Just temporary, wasn't I? Until someone better comes along? His face went from white to gray. In the front row, Blake shifted uncomfortably, avoiding everyone's eyes. I trusted you, I continued, my voice carrying through the now silent church. I loved you, but you saw me as nothing more than a stepping stone, a means to an end. Diana stood up, her face a mask of confusion and growing horror. Harrison, what is she talking about? Mother, I can explain. Explain the embezzlement? I interrupted. The affair? The planned merger that would have bankrupted dozens of families? Please, Harrison, explain to everyone exactly who you are. The SEC agents were moving forward now, flanking the altar. Rebecca had already slipped out a side door, but she wouldn't get far. Another team was waiting outside. You've ruined everything, Harrison snarled, his charming facade finally cracking completely. I smiled, reaching up to remove the Montgomery family pearls. No, Harrison, you did that all by yourself. I'm just making sure everyone knows exactly who they're dealing with. The next few moments dissolved into chaos. The agents moved in. Claire was sobbing. Diana stood frozen in disbelief, and guests were either fleeing or recording everything on their phones. Through it all, I maintained my composure, watching as Harrison's perfect world crumbled around him. As he was led away in handcuffs, Harrison turned back one last time. I did love you, in my way. Your way, I stepped close, keeping my voice low, was never good enough. Consider this my wedding gift, the truth, finally, about the man you really are. I turned away, walking back down the aisle alone, my head held high. Behind me, I could hear Diana's muffled sobs, the continued click of cameras, and the growing buzz of shocked conversations. But ahead of me lay freedom, justice, and the satisfaction of knowing that sometimes karma needs a little help arriving on schedule. The spring sunlight hit my face as I pushed open the church doors. A crowd of reporters waited outside, my final touch to ensure Harrison's downfall would be complete and public. As their questions rained down around me, I smiled, knowing that while this wasn't the fairy tale ending I'd once dreamed of, it was something better. It was justice. The following weeks unfolded like scenes from a movie I never thought I'd star in. Headlines screamed, Montgomery heir's empire crumbles and jilted bride exposes corporate corruption. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from well-wishers and journalists, all eager to hear more about the bride who brought down one of the city's most prominent families. I sat in my new apartment overlooking Central Park, a place I'd chosen specifically because Harrison had always dismissed it as new money territory. The irony wasn't lost on me. My laptop displayed the latest news. Harrison and Rebecca had been indicted on multiple charges of fraud and embezzlement. The evidence I'd gathered had opened a Pandora's box of corporate misconduct. Claire called daily, her voice always wavering between anger and desperation. Why didn't you tell me? She'd ask. I could have helped, but we both knew she couldn't have. Her blind spot for her brother had always been her greatest weakness. Diana's reaction surprised me most. 3 days after the wedding that wasn't, she appeared at my door, carrying a familiar velvet box. The pearls, she said, holding them out. They belong to you now. Diana, I couldn't— You exposed the truth, she interrupted, her voice firm despite her red-rimmed eyes. That makes you more worthy of these than anyone who's worn them before. We sat on my new sofa, drinking tea from cups I'd bought just that morning. The silence between us was heavy with unspoken words. I failed him, she finally whispered. Somewhere along the way I must have— No, I took her hand. Harrison made his own choices. You gave him everything he needed to be a good man. He chose differently. The Montgomery Enterprises investigation revealed deeper corruption than anyone had imagined. Harrison's father had laid the groundwork years ago, and Harrison had merely perfected the art of deception. The company's collapse affected hundreds of employees, but I'd prepared for that too. Anonymous tips had helped many transfer their investments weeks before the scandal broke. Blake tried to contact me once, probably hoping to save his own skin. His message sat unread in my inbox, alongside Harrison's desperate attempts at explanation. Some bridges aren't worth rebuilding. Rebecca turned state's evidence, of course. She'd always been practical that way. Her testimony would ensure Harrison spent a significant portion of his prime years in a federal institution, trading his bespoke suits for prison garb. The media painted me as a hero, the whistleblower bride who chose justice over love. They didn't understand that it was never a choice. The moment I heard Harrison's true feelings, the path forward became crystal clear. Love without respect is like a house built on sand. It's bound to collapse. My own company flourished in the aftermath. Clients appreciated working with someone who demonstrated such unwavering ethical standards. The irony wasn't lost on me. Harrison's attempt to use me had backfired spectacularly, launching me into greater success than he'd ever imagined. 1 month after the wedding, I received a letter from Harrison's grandmother. Her shaky handwriting filled 3 pages with memories of her own marriage, of watching Harrison grow up, and finally, her gratitude for preventing the family name from becoming synonymous with unchecked corruption. You did what none of us had the courage to do, she wrote. You saw the truth and refused to look away. The letter ended with a photograph, Harrison's grandfather on his own wedding day, young and hopeful, the same hope I'd once seen in Harrison's eyes, the same hope that had twisted into something darker when nobody was watching. I kept the photo, not out of sentimentality but as a reminder that appearances can be deceiving. The charming smile that had once won my heart had hidden a calculated mind plotting my destruction. Never again would I let someone else's mask become my reality. As summer faded into autumn, I found myself walking through Central Park more often. The changing leaves reminded me that transformation, while painful, was necessary for growth. Each step forward took me further from the woman who'd nearly married a lie and closer to someone stronger, wiser, and unafraid of standing alone. Diana joined me for these walks sometimes. We never spoke of Harrison directly, but his absence hung between us like an invisible thread, connecting 2 women who'd loved and lost the same person in different ways. You know, she said during one of our walks, I always wanted a daughter who would carry on the Montgomery legacy of strength and integrity. Turns out, I got one, just not in the way I expected. I squeezed her hand, understanding the weight of her words. In trying to destroy me, Harrison had inadvertently given me something precious. A family bound not by blood or false promises, but by truth and resilience. The media eventually moved on to newer scandals, but the lessons remained. Sometimes, the greatest act of love isn't saying I do, it's having the courage to say I won't. 6 months after the wedding that wasn't, I found myself standing in front of Montgomery Enterprises' former headquarters. The building's gleaming facade remained unchanged, but the company's name had been replaced by that of its new owners. Inside, a different kind of energy pulsed through the renovated offices, one of transparency and renewed purpose. I'd been invited to consult on the company's restructuring, a delicious twist of fate that hadn't escaped my notice. The new management wanted to understand how the previous corruption had gone undetected for so long. Who better to explain than the woman who'd uncovered it all? Walking through the familiar corridors, I passed Harrison's old office. It had been converted into a communal workspace, its imposing mahogany doors replaced with glass panels. Sunlight streamed in where shadows once lurked, a fitting metaphor for the company's transformation. Claire had taken over a small division of the company, determined to rebuild her family's legacy the right way. We'd slowly repaired our friendship, stronger now for having been tested. She'd inherited her mother's strength but channeled it into creating positive change. The quarterly reports show remarkable recovery, she announced during a board meeting, her voice steady and confident. We've retained 80% of our original workforce and implemented all recommended transparency measures. I watched her with pride, remembering the tearful conversation we'd had 3 months ago when she discovered even more of Harrison's deceptions. Instead of breaking her, each revelation had only strengthened her resolve to make things right. The media dubbed it the Montgomery Redemption, a story of corporate resurrection led by the women Harrison had underestimated. Diana had emerged from her initial shock to become a fierce advocate for corporate accountability, using her social connections to promote ethical business practices. My own consulting firm had expanded rapidly, specializing in corporate fraud prevention. Companies sought our services, hoping to avoid becoming the next cautionary tale. Each client brought new challenges, but none quite matched the satisfaction of dismantling Harrison's carefully constructed house of cards. The investigation had uncovered connections to other prominent families, leading to a domino effect of exposures and resignations. Harrison's circle of privileged conspirators had crumbled, their influence evaporating in the harsh light of scrutiny. Rebecca's testimony had proven invaluable to the prosecution. She'd provided details of meetings in exotic locations, of documents destroyed and accounts hidden. Her cooperation had earned her a lighter sentence, but the stigma would follow her long after her release. Blake had tried to reinvent himself as a whistleblower, claiming he'd always had suspicions about Harrison's dealings. No one bought it. Last I heard, he'd moved to a small town in Montana, his dreams of social climbing buried under the weight of his complicity. Harrison's trial was set for spring. His legal team had attempted every delay tactic possible, but justice had a way of catching up. I'd been called to testify, a prospect that filled me with a strange mix of dread and anticipation. One evening, as I was leaving the office, I received an unexpected call from Harrison's grandmother. "I've been going through old family albums," she said, her voice crackling with age and emotion. "There's something you should see." Over dinner in her elegant townhouse, she showed me photographs of Harrison as a child, images of a smiling boy who once had the potential for goodness before ambition and greed twisted his path. "I watched him change," she confided, her fingers tracing the edges of a yellowed photograph, year by year, success by success. "He became someone I didn't recognize." "You saw it too, didn't you? Before anyone else did." I nodded, remembering subtle moments when Harrison's mask had slipped, a cruel comment here, a dismissive gesture there, signs I'd chosen to ignore until that fateful night before our wedding. "The Montgomery name meant something once," she continued, closing the album. "Thanks to you, Claire and Diana. It might mean something worthwhile again." As I drove home that night, the city lights blurred into streams of gold and silver. I thought about legacy, not just the Montgomerys but my own. In choosing to expose the truth, I'd helped create a ripple effect of positive change. The wedding dress still hung in my closet, a reminder not of what I'd lost but of what I'd gained: strength, clarity, and the knowledge that sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction but reconstruction, building something better from the ashes of deception. Tomorrow, I would meet with another company seeking guidance on ethical business practices. The irony wasn't lost on me. Harrison's betrayal had led me to my true calling. In trying to use me as a stepping stone, he'd inadvertently helped me find my path. The night before my wedding, I'd overheard a truth that shattered my world. Now, 6 months later, I'd helped build a new one, stronger, clearer, and far more authentic than the illusion I'd almost married into. Spring arrived with an unexpected weight. Harrison's trial loomed on the horizon. The courtroom buzzed with tension as I took the witness stand, my voice unwavering as I recounted every detail. His eyes never left me during my testimony, but they no longer held the power to make my heart race. Instead, I saw him clearly for who he was, a man whose greatest defeat was being exposed for his true nature. The evidence was overwhelming. Each document I'd gathered that fateful night before the wedding became another nail in the coffin of his defense. His lawyers attempted to paint me as a vengeful woman scorned, but the paper trail told a different story, one of calculated fraud spanning years. The most poignant moment came when Diana testified. She sat straight-backed in the witness chair, her elegant composure intact, as she detailed how her own son had manipulated family funds and betrayed generations of trust. "The truth," she stated clearly, her voice carrying through the hushed courtroom, "must stand above blood." Harrison's face crumpled at her words. For the first time, I saw genuine emotion break through his practiced mask, the realization that he'd lost not just his freedom but his mother's unwavering support. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Each day brought new revelations, more evidence of how deep the corruption had run. Former employees testified about threats and coercion. Business partners revealed how they'd been drawn into Harrison's web of deceit. Through it all, I sat in the gallery beside Claire, watching the man we'd both loved reveal his darkest colors to the world. The verdict came on a rainy Thursday afternoon: guilty on all counts. The sentence, 15 years, no possibility of early parole. As the judge read out the terms, I studied Harrison's profile, still handsome but somehow diminished. The charming smile that had once won over boardrooms and my heart was nowhere to be seen. Rebecca, having pleaded to lesser charges in exchange for her testimony, received 5 years. She avoided my gaze as she was led away, her designer outfit replaced by prison orange. Blake, charged as an accessory, accepted a plea deal that included community service and hefty fines. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for statements. Diana stepped forward, Claire and I flanking her sides. "The Montgomery family," she announced, her voice steady, "has always valued integrity above all else. Today's verdict, while painful, upholds that tradition. We thank the jury for their service and justice for prevailing." Later that evening, we gathered at Diana's townhouse, not to mourn but to close a chapter. Claire brought out a bottle of champagne, the same vintage we'd planned to serve at the wedding. To truth, she toasted, her eyes meeting mine, and to the sister I almost had who turned out to be more family than my own brother. Diana reached for my hand as we sipped our champagne. "You know," she mused, "I've been thinking about what you said that day at the altar, about love and truth. You chose truth over love, but in doing so, you showed the greatest love of all, love for justice, for what's right." The evening softened into night, our conversation turning from the past to the future. Claire spoke of her plans to rebrand the remaining legitimate Montgomery businesses. Diana shared her vision for a foundation supporting corporate ethics education. As I drove home that night, the city's skyline glittered against the dark sky. The weight I'd carried since that night before my wedding finally began to lift. Harrison's sentencing wasn't just an ending, it was permission to truly begin again. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. A photo appeared, Harrison in his prison uniform, being led to his cell. Below it, words from a sympathetic guard: "Thought you'd want to see this. Justice served." I deleted the message without responding. I didn't need to see Harrison brought low. I'd already seen him at his highest and found him wanting. My revenge wasn't in his imprisonment but in the freedom I'd found by exposing the truth. The wedding dress that had hung in my closet like a ghost was finally packed away, donated to a charity that helped domestic abuse survivors rebuild their lives. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. What was meant to be a symbol of love and trust would now help other women write their own stories of redemption. As I fell asleep that night, I thought about the girl who'd once dreamed of becoming Mrs. Montgomery. She'd been naive, perhaps, but her belief in justice had been her saving grace. Harrison had seen her trust as weakness, never realizing it would be his undoing. The truth had cost me a wedding, but it had given me something far more valuable. The knowledge that sometimes the greatest love story isn't about finding the right partner, but about finding the strength to stand alone for what's right. 1 year after Harrison's sentencing, I found myself back at the Grand Hotel, not as a bride-to-be but as the keynote speaker for a corporate ethics conference. The irony of speaking in the same building where I'd overheard Harrison's true nature wasn't lost on me. The ballroom was packed with executives, all eager to hear from the woman who'd exposed one of the biggest corporate scandals of the decade. As I stepped onto the stage, my heels clicking against the polished wood, I caught my reflection in the glass panels, confident, poised, and completely transformed from the woman I'd been a year ago. "Good morning," I began, surveying the crowd. "You're here today because you want to learn how to prevent fraud and corruption in your organizations. But what you really need to learn is how to see the truth hiding behind perfect smiles and designer suits." In the front row, Diana and Claire sat proudly. Claire had successfully rebranded the remaining Montgomery assets into a new company focused on sustainable investments. Diana's foundation had already sponsored ethics programs at 3 major universities. "The greatest threat to corporate integrity," I continued, "isn't always external. Sometimes, it's the charming CEO with a Harvard degree. Sometimes it's the trusted partner with a flawless track record. And sometimes it's the person you plan to spend your life with." My consulting firm had grown exponentially, with offices now in New York, London, and Singapore. Companies worldwide sought our expertise in fraud prevention and corporate transparency. Each new client brought stories of near misses and close calls, potential Harrison Montgomerys caught before they could cause irreparable damage. After my speech, during the networking reception, a young woman approached me, her hands trembling slightly as she introduced herself. "I'm engaged to my company's CFO," she confided, her voice barely above a whisper. "Last week I found some discrepancies in our books. After hearing your story, I don't know what to do." I looked at her, seeing my former self reflected in her uncertain eyes. "The truth doesn't get easier to tell," I said gently, "but living with lies becomes impossible once you see them." By the end of the day, another corporate fraud had been prevented, another scandal averted. The young woman's fiancé was quietly removed from his position, the authorities notified. She sent me a thank you note a month later, signed with her maiden name and a promise to never settle for less than complete honesty. My story had become a beacon for others, a reminder that choosing truth over comfort wasn't just an option, it was a necessity. Business schools used the Montgomery case as a teaching tool, and I occasionally guest lectured, sharing insights that could only come from having loved and lost a master of deception. Claire joined my firm as a partner, her experience in rebuilding after corporate scandal proving invaluable. Together, we developed programs to help companies foster cultures of transparency and accountability. "You know," she said one evening as we reviewed case files, "I used to think Harrison was the strong one in our family. Now I realize strength isn't about maintaining power. It's about having the courage to expose wrongdoing even when it hurts." Diana's foundation launched a scholarship program for women in business ethics, naming it after Harrison's grandmother, who had passed away peacefully months after his sentencing. Her last words to me had been, "You saved our family's soul." The media still occasionally ran stories about the runaway bride who saved Wall Street, but my life had moved far beyond that single day of reckoning. My work had evolved from an act of revenge into a mission of prevention and protection. Harrison's appeals were systematically denied, his attempts to reduce his sentence falling on deaf ears. The evidence I'd gathered that night had been too thorough, too damning to dispute. Sometimes I wondered if he ever truly understood that his downfall hadn't been caused by my discovery of his plans but by his own belief that love could be used as a weapon. 1 year after exposing the truth, I stood in my office overlooking Central Park, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of redemption. On my desk sat a framed photo of Diana, Claire, and me at the opening of the Foundation's first ethics center. Next to it lay a small velvet box containing the Montgomery family pearls. No longer a symbol of betrayal, but a reminder that sometimes the most precious inheritance is the courage to stand for what's right. The truth hadn't given me the happy ending I'd once dreamed of. Instead, it had given me something far more valuable: a purpose, a mission, and a family bound not by blood or marriage, but by an unwavering commitment to integrity. 18 months after the day I walked away from my own wedding, I received an unexpected phone call. Harrison wanted to see me. His request came through his prison counselor. A meeting for closure, he claimed. Diana and Claire advised against it, their protectiveness showing in their concerned expressions. But something in me needed this final conversation, this last piece of the puzzle to complete my healing. The prison visiting room was stark and cold, nothing like the luxurious spaces where we'd once shared our dreams. Harrison sat at the metal table, the orange jumpsuit a jarring contrast to the tailored suits he once wore. His features had hardened, the polished charm replaced by a weathered authenticity I'd never seen before. "Sophia," he said, his voice rougher than I remembered, then corrected himself. "Mrs. Chin, thank you for coming." I sat across from him, maintaining a composed exterior while my heart raced with memories. "Why did you want to see me, Harrison?" He looked down at his hands, the ones that had once slipped an engagement ring onto my finger. I've had a lot of time to think about what I did, who I was, who I am. 18 months of reflection. That's quite a change, I noted, from the man who thought he could charm his way through life. I deserved everything that happened, he admitted, surprising me with his directness. The truth is, I never deserved you, not because you weren't enough, but because I wasn't. The words hung between us, heavy with the weight of lost possibilities. Through the visiting room window, I could see clouds gathering, mirroring the storm of emotions in my chest. You know what the worst part is, he continued, looking up to meet my eyes. I did love you, in my twisted, selfish way. I loved you, but I loved power more. I loved the game more. Love shouldn't be a game, Harrison, I said. No, he agreed quietly. It shouldn't. We sat in silence for a moment, the distant sounds of the prison creating a somber backdrop to our final conversation. Rebecca's been writing to me, he said suddenly, asking for forgiveness. As if forgiveness could undo what we did. I studied his face, seeing for the first time the toll of consequences on a man who'd never believed they applied to him. Are you asking for my forgiveness too? No, he shook his head. I'm asking for you to know that you were right about everything. The woman who walked away from that altar was stronger than the man standing at it ever was. The guards signaled that our time was nearly up. Harrison straightened, a shadow of his old composure returning. I heard about your work, he said, the Ethics Foundation, the consulting firm. You've built something meaningful from the ashes of what I destroyed. We all did, I replied. Your mother, Claire, we found strength in the truth you tried to bury. As I stood to leave, Harrison called out one last time. The night before the wedding, when you overheard me. Was that the first moment you knew? I turned back, remembering the girl who'd stood outside that door, clutching those cufflinks. No, I answered honestly. It was just the first time I admitted what I'd always known. Walking out of the prison, I felt lighter somehow. Not because Harrison had changed or because his recognition of his faults had given me validation. I felt lighter because I finally understood my strength hadn't come from exposing his lies or walking away from our wedding. It had come from choosing truth over comfort, justice over love, integrity over illusion. Diana was waiting in the parking lot, her presence a silent support. Are you okay? She asked as I slid into the passenger seat. Yes, I smiled, realizing it was completely true. I really am. As we drove away, I watched the prison disappear in the side mirror. Harrison would serve another 13 years, but I was already free. Free from the weight of what ifs and might have beens. Free from the ghost of a love that was more fiction than fact. The sky had cleared, and ahead of us, a rainbow arched across the horizon, nature's reminder that after every storm, there's a chance for something beautiful to emerge. My phone buzzed with a message from Claire. The Foundation's latest initiative had received full funding. Life had a funny way of working out. I'd lost a fiancé but gained a family, lost a dream but found a purpose. The night before my wedding had seemed like an ending, but it had really been a beginning, the start of a journey towards something, far more precious than the fairy tale I'd almost settled for, the truth. It turned out it hadn't just set me free, it had set us all free. 1 year after my meeting with Harrison, my life had blossomed in ways I never imagined possible. The Ethics Foundation had expanded globally, and our consulting firm had become the gold standard in corporate transparency. But it was a different kind of meeting that would mark this chapter of my story. I was giving a lecture at Columbia Business School when I noticed him in the audience. Dark eyes fixed intently on my presentation, asking thoughtful questions about preventive measures against corporate fraud. Professor Marcus Chin, visiting faculty from Stanford, specialized in business ethics and corporate responsibility. After the lecture, he approached me with an interesting proposition. Miss Grant, your experience could revolutionize how we teach ethics in business schools. Would you consider collaborating on a comprehensive curriculum? There was something refreshingly genuine about him. No hidden agendas, no carefully crafted persona, just authentic passion for creating positive change. Diana noticed it first during a foundation board meeting, where Marcus presented his ideas. He looks at you the way one should look at someone they admire, she remarked afterward, not as a prize to be won, but as an equal to be respected. Our professional collaboration slowly evolved into coffee discussions that stretched into dinner conversations. Marcus never pushed, never rushed. He understood the weight of my past and respected the strength it had given me. Claire teased me mercilessly about the way my eyes lit up when discussing our curriculum project. You know, Sophia, she said, it's okay to be happy again, to trust again. But trust wasn't something I gave easily anymore. One evening, over dinner at a quiet restaurant in Greenwich Village, I told Marcus everything. Not just the headlines he'd read, but the raw truth of loving someone who saw you as nothing more than a means to an end. His response was simple but profound. Thank you for trusting me with your story. It couldn't have been easy to share. Months passed, and our curriculum project flourished. Business schools across the country began adopting our ethics program. Marcus and I spent countless hours refining case studies, including the Montgomery scandal, now taught as a landmark example of corporate fraud detection. One rainy evening, as we walked through Central Park after a successful presentation, Marcus stopped under the shelter of a massive oak tree. You know what amazes me about you, Sophia? He said, raindrops glistening in his hair. Not just your strength in exposing the truth, but your courage to remain open to possibility, even after everything. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw what Diana had noticed months ago. Here was a man who had built his career on teaching ethics, not because it was profitable, but because he believed in it. Someone who saw my past not as baggage, but as wisdom earned. The truth is, he continued, I've fallen in love with you. Not the headline version of you, but the real you. Brilliant, compassionate, and unafraid to stand for what's right. I'm not asking for anything except the chance to show you that love can be honest, straightforward, and true. Standing there in the rain, I felt something I thought I'd lost forever. Hope. Not the naive hope of my younger self, but something stronger, tempered by experience and wisdom. Claire and Diana were ecstatic when I finally admitted I was dating again. Life has a way of bringing us exactly what we need, Diana said, squeezing my hand. Sometimes it's the courage to expose a lie. Sometimes it's the strength to embrace a truth. The Foundation's annual gala provided a perfect opportunity to make our relationship public. As Marcus and I danced under the crystal chandeliers of the Grand Hotel, yes, the same one where I'd overheard Harrison's betrayal, I realized how far I'd come. You're thinking about that night, aren't you? Marcus asked softly. Yes, I admitted, but not with regret. That night taught me to trust my instincts, to demand truth and love. It led me here. He smiled, understanding in his eyes. To quote your famous speech, the truth doesn't always give you the ending you wanted, but it always leads you to the one you need. As we swayed to the music, I caught Diana's knowing smile from across the room. She raised her glass in a subtle toast, and I knew she was thinking what I was. Sometimes the best revenge isn't in destroying what hurt you, but in building something beautiful from the lessons it taught you. The truth that shattered my world 2 years ago had led me to a love that didn't need to be tested or proved, a love as transparent and steady as the principles we both lived by. 3 years to the day after my almost wedding to Harrison, I stood in front of my full-length mirror, adjusting a different white dress. This one was simpler, more elegant, a reflection of the woman I'd become. Diana fussed with my veil, her eyes glistening with genuine happiness. This time, she whispered, everything is exactly as it should be. Claire burst into the room, champagne in hand. Marcus is practically floating out there, and you should see the students who showed up. Half of Columbia's business school came to watch their favorite professors tie the knot. The venue wasn't a grand cathedral like my first planned wedding. Instead, we chose the Botanical Gardens, where Marcus and I had spent countless hours discussing our curriculum between stolen kisses and shared dreams. The guest list was smaller, but every person present represented a genuine connection, a true relationship built on mutual respect and understanding. Ready? Diana asked, holding out a familiar velvet box. The Montgomery pearls gleamed in the morning light, once a symbol of a dynasty built on deception, now representing something different, the power of transformation, of turning pain into purpose. Actually, I smiled, closing the box gently, I think these belong to the Foundation now, a reminder of where we've been and how far we've come. Diana's eyes welled with tears as she hugged me. You truly are the daughter I was meant to have. The ceremony was everything my first one wasn't. Authentic, intimate, and filled with genuine joy. Marcus's vows spoke not of ownership or obligation but of partnership and shared purpose. When he mentioned how my story had inspired him long before we met, how my courage had made him a better educator in person, I saw the same conviction in his eyes that I'd seen during our first meeting. My own vows acknowledged the journey that had led me here. Love isn't about perfect moments or grand gestures, I said, looking into his steady gaze. It's about choosing truth over comfort, growth over complacency, and finding someone who makes those choices with you every day. The reception buzzed with energy as students mingled with business leaders, all united by our shared commitment to ethical leadership. The Foundation's newest initiative, a scholarship program for whistleblowers seeking to rebuild their careers, had just launched, turning another page in our story of transformation. Claire clinked her glass for the toast, her smile radiant. To my sister, not by blood but by choice, who taught us all that the greatest love story isn't about finding the right person, but about becoming the right person. And to Marcus, who proved that true love doesn't ask you to compromise your values, it elevates them. Later, as Marcus and I swayed to our first dance, he whispered, Do you ever think about how different life would have been if you hadn't overheard Harrison that night? I looked around the room at the family I'd found, the purpose I'd discovered, and the man who loved me not despite my past but because of how it had shaped me. That night didn't change my destiny, I replied. It revealed it. News had reached us that Harrison was up for parole review, but it felt distant, like a chapter in someone else's story. His actions had set my transformation in motion, but they no longer defined me. The woman who had walked away from a false dream had found something real, a love built on truth, a purpose born of principle, and a happiness earned through courage. As the evening wound down, Diana pulled me aside. I have something for you, she said, pressing a small package into my hands. Inside was a simple journal, Harrison's grandmother's diary from her early days as a Montgomery. She wrote about choosing truth over convenience, even when it costs you everything, Diana explained. You're not just continuing her legacy, you've reinvented it. Looking out at the garden where Marcus chatted with our guests, I felt a profound sense of completion. The revenge I'd once sought had transformed into something far more powerful. Redemption. Not just for myself, but for everyone touched by our story. The truth that had once shattered my world had ultimately made it again. Piece by piece, moment by moment, choice by choice. As Marcus caught my eye and smiled, that honest, unguarded smile that had first begun to heal my heart, I knew that sometimes the best endings aren't the ones we plan, but the ones we earn by being brave enough to embrace the truth, no matter where it leads. The night before my first wedding had taught me what love wasn't. Every day since had taught me what it truly is, a choice, a commitment, and above all, an unwavering dedication to truth, both beautiful and brutal. In the end, that was the greatest revenge of all, not just surviving betrayal, but learning to love again, more wisely, more deeply, and more authentically than ever before. 5 years after the fateful night that changed everything, I stood at a podium in front of a packed auditorium at Stanford Business School. The faces before me represented the next generation of business leaders, eager to learn from what had become known as the Montgomery case study. Marcus sat in the front row, now the department head of business ethics, beaming with the same pride he'd shown on our wedding day. 2 rows behind him sat Diana and Claire, who never missed these annual lectures. But this year was different. This would be the last time I told this story. Many of you know the headlines, I began, my voice carrying through the hushed space. The jilted bride who exposed a corporate scandal, the woman who walked away from a Montgomery. But today, I want to tell you about something more important than revenge or justice. I want to tell you about transformation. A student raised her hand. Miss Chin, what made you finally decide to stop giving these lectures? I smiled, resting my hand instinctively on my slightly rounded belly. Our first child, still our secret. Because some stories need to end so new ones can begin. After the lecture, Claire joined me in my office, perching on the edge of my desk like she used to do in our consulting days. Harrison's up for parole next month, she said quietly. He asked if we would speak on his behalf. The news didn't shock me like it might have once. Time had a way of softening even the sharpest edges of betrayal. Will you? I asked. I might, she admitted. He's different now. The letters he writes, they're not from the brother I knew. They're from the brother I wished I'd had. Diana had visited him regularly over the years, watching her son slowly shed the layers of deception that had defined him. She'd shared with me his gradual transformation, how he'd started counseling other inmates, helping them understand the ripple effects of white-collar crime on families and communities. The foundation had evolved too. What started as a response to corporate fraud had grown into a global movement for business ethics. The Montgomery pearls, now displayed in our headquarters lobby, had become a symbol of transformation, a reminder that even the darkest truths could lead to light. Marcus found me later that evening in our home office, surrounded by case studies and student papers. You're thinking about Harrison's parole, aren't you? He said. I nodded, leaning into his embrace. I'm thinking about how far we've all come. How that night before my wedding wasn't an ending at all. It was a beginning, for all of us. The next morning, I made a decision. I wrote a letter to the parole board, not to condemn or support, but to acknowledge change. The man I was going to marry chose deception over truth, I wrote. The man you're considering for parole has chosen to face that truth. In the end, that's all any of us can do, choose truth again and again, no matter the cost. The Foundation's annual gala fell on the eve of Harrison's parole hearing. As I stood addressing the crowd, I saw faces that told the story of the past 5 years, students who'd become ethical business leaders, whistleblowers who'd found new purpose, families who'd rebuilt from the ashes of corporate fraud. 5 years ago, I thought revenge was about destroying something, I concluded. Now I know it's about building something better. The greatest revenge isn't in watching someone fall, it's in helping others rise. Later that night, Marcus and I walked through our favorite spot in the botanical gardens, the same place where we'd exchanged vows, where we'd first discussed the ethics curriculum, where we'd now tell our families about the new life growing inside me. You know what I love most about our story, Marcus said, his hand entwined with mine. It's that it was never really about revenge at all. It was about truth finding its way to the surface, like a flower breaking through concrete. I thought about the journey from the bride who'd overheard a devastating truth to the woman who'd made that truth her strength, from seeking revenge to finding purpose, from a shattered dream to a life more meaningful than I could have imagined. The night before my wedding to Harrison had seemed like the end of my story. Instead, it had been the first line of a much better one. A story about choosing truth over comfort, growth over vengeance, and love that didn't need to be proven because it proved itself every day. As Marcus and I walked home under the stars, I touched my belly gently, thinking of the new chapter we were about to begin. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't in the ending of one story, but in the beginning of a better one, full circle. Exactly 6 years after that fateful night at the Grand Hotel, I received an invitation that made my hands tremble. Harrison had been released on parole, and Diana was hosting a small family dinner. The reason for the gathering stopped my heart for a moment. Harrison wanted to make amends, formally and properly, to everyone he had hurt. Marcus squeezed my hand as we pulled up to Diana's townhouse, our daughter Grace sleeping peacefully in her car seat, unaware of the weight this evening carried. At 8 months old, she embodied everything pure and honest that my life had become. Claire met us at the door, her eyes showing a mix of anxiety and hope. He's different, she whispered as she hugged me. Really different. Harrison stood as we entered the dining room. Prison had aged him, stripped away the polished veneer he'd once worn like armor. His designer suits were replaced by simple, modest clothing, but it was his eyes that showed the most change, clear, direct, without the calculating gleam I remembered. Sophia, he said softly, then corrected himself. Mrs. Chin, thank you for coming. Diana had arranged the seating thoughtfully. Marcus and I on one side, Harrison on the other, with Claire and herself as buffers. Grace's portable bassinet sat beside me, and Harrison's gaze kept drifting to her with something like wonder. She's beautiful, he said during the soup course. She has your determination in her eyes. The conversation moved carefully, like dancers avoiding invisible obstacles. Harrison spoke about his work in prison, counseling other white-collar criminals, helping them understand the true cost of their actions. He'd started a program that connected imprisoned fraudsters with their victims' families, fostering understanding and real remorse. The Foundation's work reached us even inside, he explained. Your ethics curriculum became part of our rehabilitation program. I taught it to other inmates, never telling them that the case study was my own story. Over dessert, Harrison cleared his throat. I've prepared something, if you'll allow me to read it. From his pocket, he withdrew a worn piece of paper. Dear Sophia, he began, his voice steady but humble, thank you. Not for what you prevented me from doing to you, but for what you helped me become by exposing who I was. The night before our wedding, you heard the truth about who I was then. Tonight, I want you to hear the truth about who I am now. Grace chose that moment to wake, her small cry cutting through the emotional tension. Without thinking, I lifted her, and she settled against my shoulder, watching the gathering with curious eyes. The Montgomery name once stood for power at any price, Harrison continued, looking at my daughter. Thanks to you, Claire and Mother, it now stands for integrity. The greatest gift you gave wasn't just stopping me, it was showing me a better way to live. Diana wiped tears from her eyes as Harrison spoke about his plans, working with the Foundation's rehabilitation program, using his experience to prevent others from following his old path. He'd already declined lucrative offers that would have put him back in the corporate world. I've learned that true power isn't in controlling others, he said, looking directly at Marcus and me. It's in controlling yourself, in choosing truth even when lies would be easier. As the evening drew to a close, Harrison asked to meet Grace. I found myself nodding, and Marcus supported my decision with a gentle smile. Harrison knelt before her bassinet, his face soft with emotion. Hello, little one, he whispered. Your mother taught me the most important lesson of my life. I hope you grow up to be as brave and true as she is. Walking out into the cool evening air afterward, I felt lighter somehow. Marcus carried our sleeping daughter to the car as I lingered on Diana's steps, looking up at the stars. You know, Diana said, joining me, when you exposed Harrison's truth 6 years ago, I thought our family was destroyed. Instead, you gave us all a chance at something real. The night before my wedding to Harrison had shown me an ugly truth that shattered my world, but from those shards, we'd all built something beautiful. A family bonded not by lies and obligations, but by choice and truth. As Marcus, Grace, and I drove home, I thought about the power of real redemption. Not just saying sorry, but living differently. Harrison's transformation wasn't just an ending to our story. It was proof that sometimes the greatest revenge isn't in destroying someone's world, but in helping them build a better one. The truth that had once broken my heart had healed us all in ways none of us could have imagined on that night 6 years ago. Sometimes the best endings aren't the ones we plan, but the ones we earn by facing our truths and choosing to grow from them.